Hello, my name is Jacob Toddson and welcome back to the Wisdom of Odin. Today I'm going to share some reflections with you after my brief trip here to the UK, England specifically, and my thoughts on Celtic paganism, what this means, what it means in regards to myself, and why I don't identify as a Celtic pagan, and really just kind of exploring the evolution of spirituality, of paganism, and my personal journey. And so this definitely, it's a self-reflective video, but that's something I occasionally do on this channel to kind of give everyone that watches a little bit of an idea of where I'm at personally with my own journey, and so you can kind of reflect on your own. So just some catch up. The last time I made a video kind of similar to this was when I was discussing whether or not I'm still Norse pagan. And so I'll kind of start from there because it feels like a continuation of that conversation a little bit. Because it wasn't that long ago that I was starting every single video with, hello, my name is Jacob and I'm a Norse pagan. And a lot of people have noticed that I've stopped saying that. And so a lot of people started questioning, oh, well, does that mean you're not a Norse pagan anymore? And as I kind of talk about in that video, I feel like my conception of paganism in general has changed undeniably. And I think in general, I've moved away from labels. I think this over-labeling of spirituality has its detriments because it kind of confines you in a space, especially when we know so little about the historical practices of the past. If you do just 100% reconstruction Norse heathenry, there's just not enough to go off of to build a healthy practice, in my opinion. There is stuff there. There's a lot to take away from, and I think there's a lot to learn from. I mean, that's why I was able to talk about it for, nearly 3 years without end before I started talking about other things. But that's kind of why, in general, the content has shifted into talking about Britain, talking about Ireland, about Scotland, is one, my personal interest, but also because I felt like I talked about near everything there was to do when it comes to Norse paganism and heathenry. I've covered basically every part of the poetic. I have dissected every major god and deity that we have significant information about. I've gone through a lot of the key factors, including the afterlife, the have-em-all. I've gone through how to get into it, how to give offerings. I have several introduction videos into Norse paganism. And so part of me is like, I've talked about it enough. Let's see what else is out there. And that also expands into my personal interest as well, because, the Odinic way, Odin being the chief god that I follow, the chief god that I've always looked to, Odin travels. Odin goes outside of his known world to explore and gather wisdom from all around the world. And so I think by looking at the chief god of Norse paganism, the very understanding of Odin is to go outside the bounds of what you already know to learn more. And so I think there is a benefit to being like, no, I only work with the Norse gods and things within the Norse lens. Sure, there's a benefit to that. But I think to follow the Odinic way, you kind of have to go outside those bounds. And I would say, I honestly would 100% say if you want to connect to Odin, if you want to connect to the Norse god of wisdom, of wandering, you have to leave the safety and boundary of what is often encapsulated around the concept of Norse paganism, just because that is one of the main key features of who Odin was and what he symbolizes. And so that's what this journeying has been for me, has been connecting and learning about the different parts of the world. But let's pull it back. I am just rambling, I'm sorry. But let's pull it back into the conversation of like the Celtic. And so when looking at myself, the gods I follow, the gods I worship, the gods I connect with are still Scandinavian. Like my concept of the universe, my concept of cosmology is still wrapped in within the Norse. I don't think I've ever, I'll give offerings of respect. I'll give offerings of respect to anyone's God. To, be like, I acknowledge your beliefs, I acknowledge his presence. But when it comes to my personal ritual practice, the gods I still connect with are Odin, Thor, Freyr, Freya, Jord. And those are like the main ones. And then there's a few others scattered in there. When I'm in the Netherlands, I give offerings to Nehelenia. But I've never given an offering specifically, like a planned ritual, to a Celtic deity. And it's because I don't really feel connections with the Celtic deities. I know other people do. And this is something I talked about in the recent podcast I did with the Tree Life podcast with Kubi, is I do see Celtic personally more animistically because of their concept of the other world and because of their connections with history. Their story and mythology really is the story of migrations and invasions, and how the people that existed in Ireland before the Milesians, or the people who became the Irish eventually went into Ireland, Their story of the gods are just the people who were there before. And so it seems to be very centered on ancestor veneration, but also the understanding that there's our world and the other world. And yes, there's heroes, there's mythical beings and stuff like that, but there's less of this polytheistic understanding of Odin, Thor. Like, it feels much less, at least of what we have surviving about the Irish mythologies. And after talking to people who practice Celtic spirituality, there's a much less emphasis on the Dagda, the Morgan. Like, it's just not as intense. And I appreciate that about it. And when I'm in Scotland, and I plan on making a video here really soon, I got all the notes for it. I want to film it in Scotland. I've just not had an opportunity to go back. Is talking about the Scottish concept of deities is very different from what we understand of like the Norse concept of deities. Like, the Scots have very little surviving evidence of what gods were. And if there were mostly goddesses. And even then, like, they were very malevolent beings. Like, they were not very helpful. Like, you gave them offerings so they would leave you alone. You would not give them offerings to be like, oh, the Cailleach, please help me. I'm in a time of need. It was like, please, Cailleach, don't kill my children this year. Here's some food. Like, don't steal my food. Here's food. Like, that was the relationship we have that survives of what Scottish concept of deity was. And it's mostly because of the environment they grew in. Like, the Scottish environment is very harsh. And so there is very little, like, helpful stuff in that environment. It's more or less like, I hope the environment doesn't screw me today. So very much so, it definitely seems to imply, like, even when, the gods are involved, it's more of like an appeasement rather than an asking. Whereas even in Scandinavia, I mean, yes, all the Scandinavian countries are different and unique, but when looking at like Denmark, Sweden versus Norway and Iceland, they are very different environments. You can see a lot more like gods of harvest, gods of farming, gods of sun in Sweden when their summers are so long, when the summer sun is actually quite intense, when all the flowers come out. Like, it does get nice, like the weather does have benevolence to it. Whereas in Scotland, the weather never truly reaches benevolence. It kind of stays in a constant state of fear. With an occasional rays of sunshine, they're like, oh, beautiful day, before a storm cloud rolls over you. And so, like, our environment, changes how much we connect to the gods. And so, yeah, I think that's where my conversation on like American paganism kind of comes in as well, is, discussing what it means to be an American pagan in the United States. It's really affected by our environment. Obviously we're on native land. And so the land spirits we're connecting with, we're honored in a different way. And so kind of bringing those practices in a little bit. I mean, I know some of the comments I got on my American paganism video were people talking like, oh, it doesn't bother me at all that I honor the land spirits in the Scandinavian way or in a Celtic way in America. And I totally get that. I just think there is much more depth, totally, like I've done it before, is honoring in a Celtic way the land spirits. Like, you're still honoring the other world. Like, do I think that the land spirits are completely different when we just talk about different cultures? Not necessarily. We're still just talking about spirits of the land in a different way. But I think when connecting with the spirits of the land in a place like America, you're only going to get an even deeper connection when you honor them in a way that connects to the ancestors that came from that land, connects to the people that lived and worshipped on that land before. And so you can bring in the ancestral connection, talking in Gaelic or in Old Norse, and then you can bring in the land. This is something that's become part of my practice as well. I'll say some things in Cherokee. I know some things in the Lakota language. I know things in Old Norse. I know things in Scots Gaelic. And so a lot of these things get brought into my rituals for different reasons. And this is no different when you look at a band like Heilung. Heilung sings things not just in Old Norse. They do, Proto-Germanic, Proto-Celtic. They've done, the ancient Sanskrit language when they did Nikal. Obviously there's songs that most people know are like Allfather Heitir, Odin, Old Norse and stuff like that. But they've played with and explored different languages and different cultures ever since they were a band. And I think the more we do stuff like that, the more we're going to get to not the truth necessarily, but the core of what humanity has discovered about spirituality. I think everyone has a piece of the puzzle. And if we become super guarded and are like, no, this is my puzzle piece, like, that's not the solution. Like, we do need to share the puzzle piece that we find out with one another, both culturally and individually. And it's only when all cultures and all people are able to come together in a peaceful way, in a way to work together, to bring our puzzle pieces together, that we're going to create a better world in so many different ways. I can't speak on like politics and economies and wars. Like the world is just so complicated. But I do know that if we spend a lot more time working together, a lot more time sharing our knowledge with one another to work towards bigger goals, bringing those puzzle pieces together to make the same image, we could do amazing things. But we're becoming so guarded with what we learn. We put what we learn behind walls, literally sometimes physical walls or economic walls or political walls, and then we don't share them with one another. And, I know it's so funny going through this journey. When I started this journey, people were calling me, a fascist and a Nazi. And now I'm getting called a communist and a Marxist. Homies, I'm just me. I'm just a human. I have my opinions and I have my ideas, and I'm on this journey. I don't tend to subscribe to one ideology or the other. But I think the idea of humanity coming together, that shouldn't just be owned by one political spectrum or the other. The idea of humanity coming together is something we should all want. And spirituality is no different in that. And I think the most beautiful part about the spiritual exploration, which you can explore kind of within the Glastonbury Tourist, this isn't a hardcore plug, it's just what I tried to explore in that book, is in the Glastonbury Tourist, there is a lot of crossing of cultures. You have Hindu prayers, there's Lakota prayers in there is Beltane stuff, there's an Odin-like character. And so you have a lot of cultures being mixed there. And I think that's what I find so fascinating about a town like Glastonbury, is the fact that it can be so multicultural and people coming together, and you can go to all these different spiritual things and learn something from them. Even if you don't necessarily, I didn't necessarily, I don't connect to the Hindu energies at all, when it comes to understanding the Hindu, the Vedas and things like that. But when I went to a Hindu prayer circle and they were singing, like, it was beautiful. And it still taught me something, even if I don't necessarily feel that. And to some degree, I can get that with Christianity. I've had some really good talks with people who are Christian, people who are open-minded, people who think that they don't have the only right way. That's the ultimate dividing line, is when a Christian thinks undeniably that Christianity is the only way to enlightenment and salvation. This is when the conversation falls apart, because this is just not true. There is no one correct way to connect to God. There's no one correct way to connect to the universe. There's many different ways that many different people have figured out. And whether it's salvation, enlightenment, nirvana, everyone has a different word for it. But at the end of the day, it's all just trying to connect to the equal parts of the self, the spirit, the mind, the body, the emotion, the world, the spirits around us. It's all a seeking of connecting with that on a higher level. And there's multiple different pathways to that. And so when you can find a Christian person who understands that, it's actually a really beautiful conversation. And I think every Christian individual I've gotten with and had a really good conversation about spirituality, about theology, without the need to try to convince one another that we have the only right way. And I think that is probably the best way to wrap up this conversation that's kind of sprawled into all of this. And I know I'm not going to heavily edit this, so I apologize for that. But when it comes to something like this, I make it for the people that want to listen, not for the people with, 30-second attention spans. We have a lot more to work on before we get to the point where we can have conversations like this. But just like me talking to the camera right now, this is what I seek when I sit down with anyone from any spiritual path or any walk of life, as having conversations like this, where we kind of explore what piece of the universe we figured out so that we can share it with one another. And constantly checking myself. Am I being guarded of my piece? Am I thinking that my piece of spirituality is better than someone else? Am I trying to steal theirs? Or am I trying to find where our pieces come together so we can create a beautiful and larger whole? Yeah, it's really beautiful. This last couple of years has been truly remarkable. I really do want to open up more about the things that I've figured out and the things that I've been on, and it's kind of contained within Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. So if that's something to really look into, if you're getting more into like the spiritual awakening or whatever you want to call it, getting into that kind of stuff and researching the Joseph Campbell Hero's Journey, it's something that everyone has access to. It's something that everyone can go part of. You don't necessarily have to travel the world to go on a journey. I took it a lot more literally, but anyone can take this hero's journey. And coming through the other side, you find that the elixir of life, as it's often called, I call it the puzzle piece, again, whatever you want to call it, and then you bring it back. And I think that's the ultimate thing, is finding the elixir, finding the puzzle, and then you don't greedily hold it, you bring it back to society. And I want to get a lot better at that. And so I am going to try to start making more videos, having more conversations, more openly about the spiritual journey, more openly about paganism, because I just see it's all so interwoven. And I still get comments of people trying to guard their puzzle piece. Like, no, this is only for Scandinavia. This is only for the Norse heathen. This is only for the Celtic heathen. This is only for the Irish. And you can have your own specific viewpoint. You can have your own way of looking at the world. But we're moving into an era in humanity where I think we need to be a lot less guarded of those pieces and know that we can all teach each other something. So yeah, I think that's the best way to leave it. I'm not sure if this was what the original conversation was about. I think it was supposed to be about like my connection to the Celtic. Maybe if I, just aside that, like that's the thing. Like for me, I connect to the Celtic world and the Celtic lands through ancestry. I know my ancestors are from here. And that's what I've always felt since the moment I touched Scottish soil. It's the moment I got there, I was like, holy shit, my ancestors were here. And that was a beautiful and amazing feeling. And of course, that's something I wanted to explore. And I'm continuing to explore it, and I love it. I love it. I can't wait to talk more about Scotland, but I really want to do it from Scotland. I just wasn't able to make it this trip. So yeah, thank you for my ramble. Thank you for listening. I do want to hear your thoughts down below. I wish we could all just be in a big like chat and all sharing these ideas and stuff like that. And I know in the past that like I was telling people like, hey, make social media accounts, make YouTube, share your thoughts. And I still think that, maybe don't go into it thinking you're a YouTuber, wanting to be a YouTuber. I didn't go into this thinking I wanted to be a YouTuber. It did kind of fall into my lap. YouTubing is hard, so don't do it with that in mind necessarily, but I do highly recommend getting into sharing your journey more of making a YouTube channel. It's the beauty of the internet. Social media, I'm taking my steps back from it, but I do think it needs more positive content. It needs more honest content. So sharing stuff on there, I think as long as you're staying honest, you're staying true, but social media is hard. But I think YouTube is a good place, just because the algorithm isn't as aggressive as Instagram. It's getting there with shorts, I hate it. But yeah, I really think the world needs more people sharing those puzzles. And so that's all I'm asking, is this is me sharing some of the pieces of the puzzle that I found, some of the pieces of the puzzles that others have shared with me, that I found on my own. I want to hear your pieces. I want us to all bring them together and make something really cool. That's all I want from this world. So let's continue to do that. So I'm going to stop rambling now. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video here, The Wisdom of Odin.